This is the Brotherhood. Real talk, real growth, real connections for anyone ready to own their truth and heal their wounds. Whether you identify as a man, woman, or somewhere in between, this is a space to get honest, be vulnerable, and build strength together. Welcome back. I'm your host, Raul, and today we're talking about something that happens quietly in relationships. Resentment. Not the loud kind, not the screaming matches, not the dramatic moments. I'm talking about the kind that builds up silently over years. The kind where two people can sleep on the same bed, raising children together, build their life together, and still be experiencing the relationship in a complete different way. Sometimes one person feels like they're trying their best, and the other person feels emotionally exhausted, unseen, unsupported, or alone. And over time, without realizing it, people stop seeing each other through love, and they start seeing each other through disappointments. Today's episode isn't about blaming men or blaming women. It's about understanding how resentment changes perception, how silence creates emotional distance, and how relationships can slowly become rewritten through pain, exhaustion, unmet expectations, and unspoken stories. Because one of the hardest things a person can experience is realizing that the relationship they believed they were in may not have been experienced the same way on the other side. A lot of relationships suffer from what I call the silent scoreboard, right? What is a silent scoreboard? Nobody talks about it really, but both people are keeping scores internally. So it's like hidden. Right? I did this. I sacrificed that. I carried this. I always have to figure things out. I am the one holding everything together. And the scary part is sometimes both people genuinely feel that way at the same time. For example, you can have a husband who feels like I go to work every single day. I come home tired. I try to provide. I am loyal. I stay. I'm trying. Meanwhile, the wife feels I carry the emotional weight of this entire household. I think about the kids, the bills, the planning, the future, the emotions, the stress, the communication, and I feel alone. Neither person necessarily sees the other person's eternal exhaustion. Okay? Again, this is hidden, right? This is why communication is so key, but I'll talk about that even further along. Sometimes a woman feels resentful because she's been in survival mode for years. She feels like she's always has to initiate conversation, solve problems, make plans, organize life, regulate emotions, and push things forward. Meanwhile, the man may genuinely think, I didn't even know you felt this way. That disconnection is where resentment starts growing in silence. Now, I understand that if it's communicated and it doesn't change, 100% I feel that, right? But if it's not communicated from either side, how can someone work on something that they don't know is happening? Okay, that's key. Because I've seen it in a lot of relationships. I've experienced it myself. Where the communication, you thought you had it, but you actually don't. See, there's one thing to have communication with the person you're with, and there's another to have honest communication with the person you're with. Communication and honest communication are two different things, and they get misconstrued a lot because it's just the word communication feels like it's happening, but it's not. There's a lot of truth behind things that are not being shared, if that makes sense. So, and the longer people don't communicate honesty, the more they begin narrating the relationship privately inside their own minds. See, that's what starts to build up when honest communication isn't happening. Okay. One of the hardest things in relationship is where resentment changes how actions are interpreted. Because sometimes a person generally changes out of fear of loss. But sometimes just really simply continuing things they've always done, and the other person no longer experience those actions the same way anymore. I'm going to say that again. Sometimes they're simply continuing things they've always done, and the other person no longer experience these actions the same way anymore. Why? Because they're creating a narrative in their mind, because they're not communicating truth. Now, you have to understand that these things happen. You're not conscious of these things, but at some point you do become conscious of it. And the question is, are you sharing how you feel with your significant other, with the partner in your life, right? And again, this is not one-sided. I'm speaking in general, because it can be the husband feeling this way towards the wife, and it can feel the wife feeling this way towards the husband. Okay. So I'm going to give you an example about that, right? Imagine someone who has always handled certain responsibilities quietly in the relationship. Maybe they've consistently paid the bills, picked up the kids, handled errands, fixed problems behind the scene, showed love through responsibility instead of emotional expression. But over time, emotional disconnection grows. Then the relationship reaches a breaking point. Suddenly, actions that once felt normal or expected now get viewed differently. A simple act of support, attentiveness, or presence can suddenly feel suspicious to the hurt partner or to the other partner. It doesn't have to necessarily be a hurt partner. To one person, it feels like I'm trying, I'm showing up, I care. To the other person, it feels like, why is this energy only happening or appearing now when it's always been there? I hope you guys are up to par with what I'm sharing, right? So in this, where relationships become emotionally complicated because resentment has a way of zooming in on certain moments while emotionally minimizing years of consistency that existed before those moments. A person might think, now you want to help, while the other person feels, but I've been helping. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not even the way you needed it to be, but I've always been there and showing up. And both people leave the interaction feeling unseen. Okay, so what I'm trying to get at, that these things come to fruition when the relationship probably has come to a point where it's like, okay, we need to like take some space, we need to separate, we need to divorce, we need to go this way, you need to go that way. So certain things start to look a certain way, but again, it just looks that way because the narrative has been painted in a certain way internally, where you start to pick and choose the things you see now, opposed to the things that have always been there, if that makes sense, right? So here's a deeper reflection on that, right? Sometimes resentment creates emotional revision, right? Where years of paying bills, helping with children, showing up daily, handling responsibilities, doing routine acts of care, become emotionally overshadowed by the pain that currently feels strongest. And once someone is emotionally exhausted, they often stop measuring intent and start measuring emotional impact only. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean the exhausted person is wrong for their feelings, but it also doesn't automatically mean the other person never cared, never contributed, or was intentionally manipulative. Sometimes two people are simply experiencing the same relationship through completely different emotional lens. And once resentment reaches a certain level, people stop discussing behaviors and start redefining who the other person is entirely. Okay? So there's a huge difference between I need more help and you are the problem. Once a relationship reaches an identity level resentment, the language changes. The language changes. Like Completely changes, right? For example, at first, the complaint are I need support, I need consistency, I need partnership. But eventually it becomes you're not motivated. I've been carrying you. You're just not that person. Let's say, right? This is an example. Those statements don't just hurt emotionally, they shake identity because now a person isn't just questioning the relationship, they're questioning who you are. Okay? Here's a powerful reflection on that. A lot of people aren't grieving the breakup itself. They're grieving the realization that the one person they loved may have secretly viewed them very differently than the viewed themselves. Okay, I'll say that again. A lot of people aren't grieving the breakup itself. They're grieving the realization that the person they loved may have secretly viewed them very differently than they viewed themselves. And sometimes these relationship dynamics didn't even begin in adulthood. They began in childhood. So there's trauma there. Okay? This is why it's very important to do the work. Get to the root of your wounds, the root of your trauma, because it can carry out when you're an adult and you may never understand why is it that you feel a certain way. Okay. And a lot of times it doesn't even have to be because of the other person. Most times, as a matter of fact, it's not the other person. It's you. The other person just becomes a mirror for you. Right? That's the point of relationships, right? It's to evolve, right? To catch loops, to catch patterns, to change loops, to change patterns. But it also starts with wounds that you may not have healed completely because there's layers of healing childhood wounds and traumas. Layers. See, there's people out there that may not believe that you need to do those things. There's people out there that may actually hold on to it because it represents something that it can represent who they are today in a empowering way, which is great. But at some point, it will catch up. And sometimes it has caught up, but you're not being honest with yourself in those things. So your relationship is the one that takes the hit. Now, relationships can mean not just romantically, it can mean any type of relationship. You can have a fallout with a family member, a friend, a coworker. But the point is to get to the root of those traumas, those wounds, because it will always catch up. Right? A lot of people enter relationships carrying invisible childhood roles. Some people grow up becoming caretakers emotionally. Some grow up learning love through sacrifice. Some become over functioners. Some become emotionally avoidant. And without realizing it, they recreate those same dynamics as an adult. Right? For example, I was someone who was very emotionally avoidant, right? I was raised a certain way. I saw certain things when I was raised. And my relationship has mirrored those things back to me, where at some point, something happens in your life where you start to work at it and those things come back up, right? If you guys heard my previous episodes, I've shared these things, right? I've been very openly about my relationship, right? And it's very interesting, and it's actually kind of exciting to know these things and work at the root of these things, right? Yeah. So let me give you another example. A woman who grew up watching her mother carry emotional and financial weight may unconsciously become attracted to people she feels needed by. Okay, I'll say that again. A woman who grew up watching her mother carry emotional and financial weight may unconsciously become attracted to people she feels needed by. Okay, so at first it feels like love, purpose, loyalty, nurturing, but years later, that person could wake up exhausted and resentful because she feels or he feels responsible for everyone. On the other side, a man who grew up emotionally disconnected may think, I'm present, I'm here, I'm trying. This was me. Okay, I'm giving you guys an example, but this was me. Without realizing his partner experiences him as as emotionally unavailable. Okay, now at some point you got to be honest with what is emotionally unavailable. Okay, now obviously I used to be that person where, you know, my partner can tell me certain things and I'm just worried or focused or whatever is happening around, and my focus is not paying attention to what is being said, etc. Right? From my understanding of emotional availability. Okay, but those things happen, and it comes from childhood wounds. It doesn't come as you being an adult. It's just catching up when you are an adult. But these things come from things that we have absorbed when we were kids, right? A lot of couples are not fighting each other. They're fighting unresolved versions of their childhood patterns. Okay. And that's why relationships become complicated, because sometimes both people have valid pain at the same time. Okay. And this is like deep work. This is not surface level. I'm gonna meditate. I'm gonna read a book. I'm gonna go to therapy. It can be all those things, but just know that there's layers of these wounds that need to heal. Okay, layers, because it's gonna show up again. It's almost like the universe is going to challenge you when you get over one hurdle. They'll try to the universe will try to will challenge you in another way with the same thing, just to see if you've gotten over that hurdle. Have you really gotten over that hurdle? Because again, there's different layers. Okay, this is the part where people struggle with the most. The idea that two people can both feel hurt and both feel misunderstood at the same time. For example, one person may genuinely feel, I gave everything I had, while the other person may genuinely feel, I felt alone the entire time. Both experiences can feel real to the people living in them. Intent and impact are not always the same thing. A person can love deeply and still fail to meet their partner emotionally. A person can try and still leave the other person feeling unsupported. And another person can become so overwhelmed by resentment that they stop seeing the humanity in the persons beside themselves. Okay? That's why communication matters before resentment hardens into identity. And again, true communication. True communication means you being honest, 100% honest with the person that you are building a life with, this partner of yours. Because if that is not happening, all these things I just shared so far is what comes up, is what makes relationship complicated. But this is the point of life, to evolve, to heal these wounds, right? It's part of the process. But you see, I'm grateful for a platform like this. I'm grateful for the experiences that I've had and still continue to have, because it allows me to share these things where people can resonate and be like, yo, like, bro, I'm going through this right now. Like, how did you know? Right? And a lot of times we don't share things because we may feel like people are going to judge us. I used to be that person. I no longer am that person. I don't care what people have to say about the things that I share. At the end of the day, within me, being truthful is a gift that we share with the world. Being your authentic self is a gift you share with the world. Right. So That's why communication matters before resentment hardens into identity. Because once people emotionally rewrite who you are in their minds, it becomes very hard to reconnect. Now, can you reconnect with the person? Of course. Anything is possible. The question is, do you? And are you going to put in, and I don't want to say put in the work, but are you going to take the steps to figure out what is it that you need to heal the wounds that you're carrying into your adulthood, into your relationships? Because remember, it's not just romantic relationships. It can be any type of relationship. It can be friends, co-workers, family. Okay. So as you guys know, I always have a listener's challenge, right? Where I ask the listeners a question. And I always want the listeners to be honest with themselves. You're not being honest with anybody else but yourself. Answer it honestly, right? Sit in a room and write it down and really have this space for yourself to answer the questions, right? I've had many people who listen to my podcast and would DM me, their responses, which I love because I love reading them, right? I love reading when my listeners actually answer the questions. And, I've always been the type of person to be there to help people out in the best possible way to my ability, because I'm not perfect. No one is. So I can only give a response, advice to the best of my ability. Always. You're always going to get that from me. Those who know me know that I'm always honest to the point that is raw, to the point that if you and people that work with me will tell you this, I'm never going to give you what you want to hear. I'm always going to give you what you need to hear. And it's great to have someone like that, because I also have someone like that. I have a mentor that, at the end of the day, we're humans. I have a mentor that he is never going to tell me what I want to hear. Never. He's going to tell me what I need to hear. And even if it hits you, even if you get upset of what they're saying, at the end of the day, if it triggers you, it's because it's true. See, you don't get triggered. You don't defend when you know it's true. Right? When somebody tells you something and you go, man, that's true, you're not triggered. You don't get defensive. But when you know it's true and you're not being honest about it being true, the first thing you do is defend yourself. Right? The first thing you do is get upset of what they're saying. Right? So I always do my best to be honest with people. My best, of course, because again, we're not perfect. Right? So here's the listener's question. Right? So my question for the listeners today is, have you ever realized that someone was experiencing your relationship completely different than you were? I'll read it again. Have you ever realized that someone was experiencing your relationship completely different than you were? That's the first question. Second question. And at what point do you think resentment became to the deep? And at what point do you think resentment becomes too deep to repair? First question, have you ever realized that someone was experiencing your relationship completely different than you were? Part two, second question to that. And at what point do you think resentment becomes too deep to repair? See, I honestly feel like repairs can be done. Obviously, we all know and seen, if you think about materialistic things, everything could be repaired. So can we. So can relationships. But you just got to be honest with yourself at some point if it's something you want to repair, right? Because at the end of the day, you can't repair someone else. You can only repair yourself and hope that the other person will want to choose to follow. Because at the end of the day, it's a choice. Right? You cannot force someone to work on themselves, And you cannot force someone to work with you either. Okay. All you can do is lead by example and show that, right? Show that you're working on you so that the person that you share this life with, if you are sharing this life with someone, but again, not just romantically, friendship as well, and family, co-workers, you lead by example and you also show that you are working on you. And whoever, and this is how crazy it is, whoever is meant to be around that will stay, because they are also seeing that motivation to also want to become better and even match your energy. Because at the end of the day, who doesn't want to be better for themselves? Who doesn't? And if you are in a relationship with someone, whether it's family, coworker, again, friend, or romantically, and you see that this person is evolving, why wouldn't you want that? Especially when you have experienced your own life in a certain way that you might not even like or be happy with at the moment. Okay, so relationships rarely collapse overnight. Most of the time, they slowly erode through silence, assumptions, emotional exhaustion, unmet expectations, and stories people never fully say out loud. And maybe one of the most important things we can learn is this: communication before resentment becomes identity. Communication before disappointment turns into emotional distance. Communication before the person you love becomes someone you no longer recognize. As always, guys, thank you for tuning in with me today. And always remember, come for the truth, stay for the brotherhood.
I could do better. I finally made it this far and I'm not looking back.